All right, let's dive into this deep dive into Sun Tzu's The Art of War. We're going to be looking at the 1994 Project Gutenberg edition. It's the one translated by Lionel Giles. And we're going to break this classic military treatise down. It's amazing how relevant it still is, even after all these centuries.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out why that is. So, right away, I was hooked by the historical context. I mean, wow, what a powerful introduction. We got Sun Tzu, maybe a Chinese general during the second half of the Zhou dynasty. And he's showing off his military skills by drilling the king of Wu's concubines. Two of them were even executed for disobedience. Talk about commitment to discipline, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a story that grabs you. But we should probably mention that Sun Tzu's historical existence, well, it's actually a bit of a debate among scholars. Even though he was supposedly serving under King Holu of Wu, he's not mentioned in the Zhu's one, which is a pretty major historical text from that period.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's surprising. So are we saying that The Art of War might have been written by someone else?
It's possible. Scholars like Yeshi Sin have looked into that idea. They suggest the text might be the work of a later scholar. But then you have other scholars, like Pai Sun, who think that the original 13 chapters are the real deal. But with additions, maybe even forgeries thrown in over time, it's kind of a puzzle for sure. But even if we don't know for sure who wrote it, the core ideas in The Art of War definitely point to a seasoned military strategist from the late Chunkyu period.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the stuff in there, the depth of knowledge, it definitely sounds like it came from someone with real experience. One of the things that really jumped out at me was Sun Tzu's focus on winning through stratagem. This idea that the best victory is the one you win without even fighting. It really highlights the importance of planning everything out, deception and using your opponent's weaknesses against them.
Absolutely. Sun Tzu's philosophy, it goes way beyond just brute force. It's about being smarter than your opponent, knowing yourself and knowing your enemy like inside and out. And that's where his famous quote comes in. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. It's a reminder that knowledge and understanding those are the ultimate weapons.
So it's all about being strategic. And not just when you're planning. Sun Tzu also talks about how important speed and decisiveness are. Once you're actually in a conflict, he says that wars that drag on, they just drain your resources and wear everyone down.
He's right. Those long, drawn-out conflicts, they don't help anyone. Sun Tzu stresses the need to move fast and take decisive action. He also emphasizes how important it is to be adaptable. He wants commanders to be like water, flowing around obstacles and adapting to the terrain. He's basically saying don't get stuck with rigid battle plans. You need to be flexible and change your tactics as the situation on the battlefield changes.
It's pretty amazing to think about. These ideas of agility and adaptability were being discussed centuries ago. And the book is full of these cool stories that show these principles in action, like the one about Zhu Ziliang. He used a clever trick to stop Sima Yi from attacking.
Oh yeah, he just left the city gates wide open, with a few guys sweeping and sprinkling the ground like nothing was wrong, and Sima Yi, he thought it was a trap, so he decided to back off.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Such a simple thing, but it played right into Sima Yi's thinking. And speaking of clever tactics, there's also that story about Hannibal and how he used oxen with burning twigs tied to their horns to scare off the Roman troops who were guarding a mountain pass. It's wild how these ancient strategists could take something that seems like a weakness and turn it into an advantage.
Yeah. Those stories, they really show what Sun Tzu meant by formlessness. This idea of being adaptable and formless like water, just like water adapts to whatever container it's in. A good military leader has to adapt their strategies to whatever situation they're facing. This formlessness lets you make unexpected moves and totally turn the tables on your opponent.
And Sun Tzu takes this idea of formlessness even further. When he starts talking about spies and intelligence gathering, he identifies 5 different kinds of spies, each with a specific job to do in gathering information. And even manipulating the enemy. The doomed spy, that one really caught my attention. Sending someone on a mission knowing they'll probably die to spread false information? That's a pretty chilling tactic. How would they even choose someone for that role?
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about the methods and ethics of war back then. While Sun Tzu doesn't go into detail about how they'd pick a doomed spy, it seems like they'd need to be believable and have some real information to make what they're saying seem more credible.
It's a high-stakes game for sure.
Hmm.
I'm also curious about how Sun Tzu talks about treating converted spies well. Those are the ones who defect to your side. It seems kind of contradictory to using doomed spies.
Well, Sun Tzu, even though he talks about using deception, he also knew how important it was to build trust and loyalty. Converted spies, they can give you super valuable information about how the enemy works. And if you treat them well, they'll keep giving you that information. It's pretty interesting, this idea of recognizing the human element, even in the middle of a war.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to Sun Tzu's approach.
Yeah,
It's not just about tactics and maneuvers. It's also about understanding and manipulating human psychology.
exactly. And that's one of the things that makes the art of war so relevant even today. The principles in this ancient text, they go way beyond the battlefield. They apply to all kinds of modern situations, like business negotiations or even personal relationships. Think about it: adaptability, strategic planning, understanding your opponent. Those are all useful skills no matter what you're doing, whether you're facing a competitor in the boardroom or dealing with a tough situation in your personal life.
It's like Sun Tzu created this blueprint for success that goes way beyond just winning wars. But what about the more specific details of warfare?
Well, one thing Sun Tzu talks about that I think you'll find really interesting is how to use the terrain strategically. He actually identifies 9 different types of terrain, each with its own advantages and disadvantages.
Wow, that sounds like a whole deep dive in itself. I'm ready to explore the battlefield and learn how Sun Tzu saw the ground beneath the army's feet as a tool for victory.
Sun Tzu's classification of terrain, it's really quite something. It's incredibly detailed. He covers everything from accessible ground, which is like open and easy to move around on, all the way to desperate ground where you're trapped with no way out. He really hammers home how important it is to understand the environment you're fighting in and use it to your advantage.
So it's not just about the troops you have, it's also about mastering the landscape. What kind of advice does he give about how to approach these different types of terrain?
Well, he has specific recommendations for each one. For example, on accessible ground, he says the first thing you want to do is secure the high ground and make sure your supply lines are protected. Makes sense, right?
Right.
You want that tactical advantage. And you definitely don't want to run out of supplies in the middle of a battle.
Yeah, high ground and a steady supply of resources are key to keeping the momentum going. What about terrain that's more difficult to move around in?
He calls that entangling ground. Think like dense forests or swampy areas. In those situations, he says, be careful. Try to lure the enemy deeper into the terrain where you can ambush them. Knowing the landscape really well becomes your weapon.
Ah, so you use the environment itself to trap your opponent. That's clever. Does he talk about more neutral territory too?
Yeah, he calls it temporizing ground. It's basically a stalemate zone where neither side has a clear advantage. His advice: avoid it. Don't waste your time and resources fighting in a place that won't give you a real strategic benefit.
Pick your battles right. What about more strategically important landscapes, like narrow passes or elevated areas?
Oh yeah, Sun Tzu knows how important it is to control those features. Narrow passes, well, they're natural choke points that are easy to defend. And heights, they give you a commanding view of everything around you, so you have a visual advantage over the enemy. Holding those positions can be crucial to controlling how the battle unfolds.
It's like a game of military chess, securing key positions to control the whole board. Does he talk about any type of terrain that gives you control over a wider region?
He does. He calls it ground of intercepting highways. Basically, whoever occupies this type of terrain first, they're in a really powerful position. They can control the surrounding states and decide how the fight is going to happen.
That sounds incredibly powerful, like holding the central hub of a network and influencing everything around it. What about situations where an army is trapped or facing overwhelming odds?
Sun Tzu categorizes those as serious ground, difficult ground, and desperate ground. Those are the situations where your survival depends on strategic thinking, courage, and a little bit of luck. He gives specific advice for each of them. On serious ground, where you've gone deep into enemy territory, he says make sure you have a safe way to retreat and keep your troops well supplied. On difficult ground, which is hard to move around in, he advises moving quickly and avoiding long engagements. And on desperate ground, when it seems like defeat is inevitable, he says fight with everything you've got, because, well, at that point, you have nothing left to lose.
It's a pretty stark reminder of how brutal war can be. But it also shows that Sun Tzu understood that even in the worst situations, hope can be a powerful motivator, and that even a seemingly impossible situation might be turned around with the right strategy, bravery, and a bit of good fortune.
Exactly. Sun Tzu's insights into the human side of warfare are just as important as his tactical advice. He knew that battles are won not just by armies, but by the minds and hearts of the people in those armies.
So you need more than just a strong army. You need to understand the psychology of your own troops and your enemy's troops. What kind of advice does he give on that?
Sun Tzu really emphasizes the importance of building a strong bond between the general and his soldiers, that sense of unity, a shared goal, and mutual respect. Those are all essential for creating a cohesive and effective fighting force. He talks about treating soldiers with compassion while also maintaining discipline. It's a tough balance to strike.
It's kind of like being a parent, right? Being firm but fair. You demand excellence, but you also show that you care and understand.
That's a great analogy. He actually compares the relationship to that of a father and son. He says generals should see their soldiers as their own children. He believes that creates a deep loyalty that will help them get through even the most dangerous battles.
Makes sense. A leader who inspires trust and loyalty will have soldiers who are willing to follow them anywhere. But does Sun Tzu ever talk about the dangers of being too lenient?
He does. He recognizes that being too soft can undermine your authority and lead to a lack of discipline. You need to have a kind heart, but you also need to be able to enforce your commands and stop any disorder from happening. Otherwise, he says your soldiers become like spoiled children, useless for anything practical.
Good point. You can't be an effective leader without finding that balance. Now, I'm curious about how he talks about actually moving armies across the battlefield. What does he say about maneuvering troops effectively?
Sun Tzu sees maneuvering an army as a kind of strategic dance. Every move has to be deliberate and calculated. You have to anticipate what the enemy is going to do and always try to gain a tactical advantage. Speed and fluidity are super important. He compares a conquering force to the bursting of pent-up waters into a chasm 1,000 fathoms deep. He's really emphasizing the importance of a swift and decisive attack.
Wow, that's a powerful image. He definitely values striking quickly and avoiding those drawn-out engagements. Does he give any specific strategies for achieving that fluidity in maneuver?
He does. He's all about adaptability. He wants commanders to be able to adjust their formations and tactics based on what the enemy is doing. He goes back to that water analogy. He says, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. Basically, he's saying that being rigid will get you into trouble.
So a good commander needs to be like water, fluid, adaptable, and always responding to the changing tides of battle. Does he have any advice on how to keep those movements hidden from the enemy?
He does. He's a big fan of combining secrecy with suddenness. He tells commanders to let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. The element of surprise, he says, can be just as effective as any weapon.
It's all about keeping the enemy guessing, messing up their plans and hitting them when they least expect it. Does Sun Tzu ever consider how these tactics might affect the soldiers themselves?
Oh yeah, for sure. Sun Tzu knows that war takes a toll on morale. He points out that a whole army may be robbed of its spirit. A commander-in-chief may be robbed of his presence of mind. He gets it that a soldier's spirit is highest in the morning. By midday, it starts to waver a bit. And by evening, all he wants is to go back to camp.
So a smart general needs to keep in mind how his troops' energy and motivation are going up and down. Does Sun Tzu give any guidance on how to use those shifting moods to your advantage?
He does. He suggests that a really clever general avoids attacking an army when their morale is high and instead waits to strike when their energy is low. And they're more focused on getting back to camp. He calls this the art of studying moods. It's all about understanding how war affects people psychologically, on both sides, and using that knowledge to win.
It's incredible how he blends psychology and military tactics. He's not just thinking about the physical battle, but also the mental game that's happening at the same time.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important part of Sun Tzu's teachings, knowing when to fight, and just as importantly, when to withdraw. He reminds us that retreating doesn't always mean you're weak.
That's an interesting point. I can see how a strategic retreat could be a better move than a pointless last stand.
Yeah.
Does he give any specific advice on when it's a good idea to withdraw?
He does. He gives a whole list of things to avoid. Roads that shouldn't be followed, armies that shouldn't be attacked, towns that shouldn't be besieged, positions that shouldn't be contested, and even commands from the sovereign that shouldn't be obeyed.
Wait, disobeying the sovereign. That's a pretty bold statement, especially in a society where they had so much respect for authority.
Yeah, it is. But it shows you how deep Sun Tzu's strategic thinking was. He understood that blindly following orders could be just as bad as being reckless. He's putting the responsibility for making good judgments on the general, even when those judgments go against what the ruler wants.
That takes a lot of courage and conviction. It shows how important it is for a leader to be able to think critically and act decisively even when they're under pressure from above.
Hmm.
I bet those leadership lessons apply to a lot more than just the battlefield.
Oh, absolutely. Those are timeless principles. They apply to any situation where you have to make strategic decisions. But Sun Tzu doesn't stop there. He also talks about one of the most fascinating parts of warfare, the world of spies and intelligence gathering.
I'm really interested to hear what he has to say about that. Espionage, it all sounds so shadowy and secretive, full of intrigue and danger.
Yeah, espionage and intelligence gathering, it does sound like something out of a spy movie. All cloak and dagger stuff, like
Yeah.
shadowy figures sneaking around enemy camps and stealing secrets.
So what does Sun Tzu actually say about this world of spies?
Well, Sun Tzu, he was all about the power of information. He knew that knowledge is a weapon, and a good general uses that weapon to beat his opponent. He actually lays out a whole system for creating and managing a network of spies, each with their own specific role to play. It's like a whole game of information warfare.
So he's basically saying, know what your enemy's doing before they do it, and then use that knowledge to outsmart them. But how do you even go about building a network like that? Where do you find these spies?
Sun Tzu identifies 5 different types of spies. They all come from different parts of society, and they each offer different kinds of intelligence. Like local spies, for example. They're recruited from the enemy's territory. And they can give you valuable insights into the enemy's culture, the terrain they're familiar with, even the morale of their troops.
So they're like your eyes and ears on the ground, give you a first-hand look at what's happening behind enemy lines. What about spies who work within the enemy's own ranks?
Those are called inward spies. Think of officials in the enemy's government or military who have been bribed or convinced to work for you. These spies can give you access to really sensitive information, things like battle plans, troop movements, even the enemy's overall strategy.
Wow, that's like serious infiltration, like having a mole buried deep inside the enemy's organization, feeding you secrets from the inside. Are there any other types of spies that Sun Tzu thinks are particularly valuable?
He talks about converted spies as being especially insightful. These are enemy spies who you've captured, and then convinced to switch sides. They already know a lot about how the enemy's intelligence system works, so the information they have can be incredibly useful.
Right, and we talked about how Sun Tzu emphasizes treating these converted spies well. It seems kind of strange to be nice to someone who used to be your enemy.
It's all part of Sun Tzu's practical approach. He understood that even in the world of espionage, loyalty and trust are important tools. By treating converted spies well, you get them to cooperate with you, and you keep getting access to their expertise.
So there's a psychological game going on here, not just with the enemy, but with your own spies too. It's about building relationships and using human nature to your advantage. What about spies who are sent on missions where they know they might not come back?
Sun Tzu calls those doomed spies. They're sent to spread misinformation, knowing that their mission is probably a one-way trip. He also talks about surviving spies, the ones you rely on to gather intelligence over a long period of time. Each type of spy has a different role to play in this whole system of information warfare.
It's amazing to think about this whole network of spies working behind the scenes, each one contributing to the overall goal. It really shows how much Sun Tzu believed in the power of knowledge.
Absolutely, and he makes that very clear in his writing. He says that the most valuable spies are the converted ones, because they have first-hand knowledge of the enemy's plans, their weaknesses, and even their way of thinking. It's like having a direct line into the enemy's inner circle.
I can't imagine any ruler reading Sun Tzu's work and then deciding to ignore the importance of intelligence gathering. He makes a really strong case for building and maintaining a good network of spies.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't hold back. He says that not investing in your spy network is not only stupid, but also inhumane, because it makes the war last longer and causes unnecessary suffering for everyone involved.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It shows that he's not just focused on winning battles, he's also concerned with reducing the overall cost of war. Which brings us back to something we talked about earlier. His focus on discipline and order within an army. Seems like that's a fundamental part of any successful military force. But I'd love to hear more about how Sun Tzu approaches this idea of discipline.
Sun Tzu is absolutely convinced that discipline is the foundation of a strong army. He uses this analogy of a well-oiled machine, where all the parts work together smoothly and efficiently. He says that without discipline, an army is just a chaotic mob.
Like a symphony orchestra, right? Where each musician has to play in sync and follow the conductor's lead to create something beautiful. Does he offer any specific strategies for creating that discipline within an army?
He emphasizes the importance of constant practice and drilling. He says discipline can't be something you just talk about once. It has to be ingrained through repetition until it becomes second nature. He also stresses the need for clear and consistent commands from the leadership. He says if the orders are confusing or contradictory, it's the general's fault, not the soldiers.
So he's placing the responsibility for maintaining order directly on the leaders. That's a big responsibility. Does he talk about what happens when discipline breaks down?
He acknowledges that sometimes punishment is necessary to maintain order, but he also believes that a truly effective leader creates a sense of loyalty and respect among his troops, so that punishment is less necessary.
Like that balance of firmness and fairness we were talking about before, inspiring your troops to follow you willingly, instead of because they're afraid of being punished.
Exactly. He even says that if punishments aren't enforced when they're deserved, the soldiers become useless, like spoiled children. He understood that you need both compassion and authority to be a good leader.
That's a really valuable insight for any leader, not just in the military. It reminds us that compassion is important, but it can't come at the expense of being effective. It seems like so many of Sun Tzu's teachings go beyond the battlefield and offer valuable lessons for leaders in all areas of life.
That's what's so amazing about The Art of War. Even though it was written centuries ago about ancient warfare, the principles in the book are still true today. They're about human nature, strategy, and the pursuit of victory in any situation.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the depths of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, from the secrets of espionage to the complexities of leadership. His insights offer a wealth of knowledge for anyone who wants to understand the dynamics of conflict and competition.
And even though we've covered a lot, there's always more to discover and think about in this ancient text. Its wisdom continues to challenge and inspire us, reminding us that achieving victory, no matter what form it takes, requires careful planning, adaptability, and a deep understanding of both ourselves and our opponents.
So until our next deep dive, we encourage you to keep exploring the world with a strategic mind. Seek out knowledge, embrace adaptability, and always remember that the greatest victories are often won not through brute force, but through cunning, wisdom, and the strategic use of knowledge.